Great. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Just a quick note, captions are available, so if you're watching through Zoom, you should be able to open the subtitles at the bottom of your page. Okay, my name's Imani Rupert Gordon. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Center for Lesbian Rights. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight for our panel discussion, 30 years after the ADA, an intersectional look at what we've done and where we still need to go. We'll be joined by a fantastic panel of guests who will be introduced in just a minute. As many of you know, this year marks the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. The ADA is one of our most comprehensive pieces of civil rights legislation that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, school, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the public. This legislation was life-changing, but we still have a long ways to go, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. This is an important conversation because it matters that we consider all parts of our identities when we have conversations about our fight for justice. Tonight, we'll have a brilliant discussion by some amazing panelists. To get started, I want to introduce our moderator for the evening, Crystal or Kay Shakespeare. Kay Shakespeare is a community professional and advocate with over 10 years of nonprofit work experience. She is hard of hearing with a bilateral, high frequency, moderate to severe hearing loss disability and wears hearing aids. Kay is the founder of Black Nerd Disabled on Instagram, a platform dedicated to storytelling and exploring the nuances of intersectionality within the disabled community. She's Black, a proud nerd, and quirky and queer, and she just wants her hearing aids to come in cheetah print. Kay, thank you for joining us, for your brilliance, and for moderating this panel. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Imani, for inviting us into this unique space where we could be authentically real about our lived experiences. The work of the National Center for Lesbian Rights is important, and remembering how inclusive legal work, especially work related to the American Disabilities Act, can impact our lives needs to be centered. I'm excited to be in the company of some wonderful individuals tonight as we discuss the challenges, beauty, and joy of being disabled and Black, along with our LGBTQ community and gendered experiences. There's a power in our multifaceted lives. Our movement will not advance if our conversations are not inclusive. We can't talk about disability without talking about race, gender, class, sexual orientation, and other systems. So, on that note, I would like to introduce our panelists for this evening. I'd like to start with Vilissa Thompson. Vilissa is a macro-minded social worker from South Carolina. Ramp Your Voice is her organization where she discusses issues that matter to her as a Black disabled woman, including intersectionality, racism, politics, and why she unapologetically makes good trouble. Jaden is a poet, a cultural worker, and educator dedicated to cultivating healing-centered spaces for marginalized communities. As a Black, queer, trans organizer, Jaden's work uplifts racial justice, gender equity, and violence prevention. Jaden Fields has facilitated community health programs and support groups and created intentional spaces committed to healing and wellness. Jaden was the inaugural member of the Transgender Advisory Council for the City of Los Angeles and was on the board for Gender Justice Los Angeles. As a performer, he believes in the beauty and vulnerability and strength in the stories our body holds. He trusts that storytelling is an ancestral form of magic, so he tries to tell some of his own sometimes. He has performed all over Los Angeles, including LA Pride, Long Beach Pride, Venice Pride, and DTLA Proud Fest. Jaden self-published his first chapbook, Intentional Musings on Staying Alive When I Want to Die, an honest depiction of navigating mental health and systemic oppression and leaning into his own healing. Keah Brown is a journalist, a screenwriter, and author. She created the viral hashtag DisabledNQ in 2017 and one of the Root's most influential African Americans in 2018. She's deeply passionate about pop culture, music, film, and TV. Her work can be found in the New York Times, Glamour Magazine, Marie Claire UK, and Harper Bazaar, among others. Keah Brown's debut essay collection, The Pretty One, is out now on Atria Books. Her picture book, Sam's Superseat, will be out in 2022 via Cochlea Books. You can learn more about her at keahbrown.com. So let's get to our first question of tonight. This year represents the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. For those who don't know, the ADA was enacted in 1990 and is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life. It guarantees equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities in public accommodations, employment, transportation, state and local government services, and telecommunications. So I'd like to ask, what has the ADA meant for you? Alyssa, would you like to start us off?
Sure will. For me, being kind of an older, quote unquote, millennial who started school, kindergarten in 91, you know, just to be able to start school in 91 and have the supports that I needed as a student was important. Luckily, you know, the ADA talks about having a free and accessible and education, you know, public education, you know, and that's what I was able to receive at that time. And just knowing that I had a right to do that and that the right protected my presence at my school, protected me as a student so that I wouldn't be discriminated against by any teachers, anything like that. And luckily for me, my K through 12 and later on college and graduate experiences, you know, allowed me to have those supports, have an aide from K through 12 that assisted me to and from class, have two sets of books, one at school, one at home, particularly when I got to middle school and high school where the books started to get heavier and we had to change classes. Things of that nature just really made school bearable, you know, tolerable, you know, especially as a young person trying to figure out who I am and where I fit in. So, you know, the law just really was pivotal to ensuring that I felt included, that I was supported academically and socially and wasn't treated as an outsider. And I know that sadly, that is not the case for every disabled student in our country, you know, with the ADA. But fortunately for me, that was my experience. And that really allowed me to be on the road for success so that I can pursue my dreams of going to college and being a college disabled student and, you know, majoring in the courses that matter to me and just being free to be fully, you know, integrated and be independent and learn how to be independent as a student and then as an adult. So the ADA has truly influenced my life path, and I really don't know a life without it.
So for me, the ADA was enacted a year before I was born. So I was born in 91. So like I've never, like Vilissa says, I've never known a world without it. And I had an aide in elementary school, and I also had a pair of books at school and a pair of books at home because they were way too heavy. And I think that, like, when I think about the person that I am today and the things that I'm able to do, it's in part because of the ADA and because I had access to, you know, certain classrooms and certain subjects that allowed me to see what I enjoy to do, like what I enjoy doing, and didn't put me in boxes. I think even when I found myself frustrated by, you know, mean teachers or people who just didn't understand what it was like to be a disabled person growing up, trying to figure out who you are, and also dealing with the fact that, like, disability representation was trash then and is trash now, I was still able to do what I wanted to do and learn the things I wanted to learn, and then go on to college and get a degree in journalism and make a career out of it. So much like Vilissa said, I really am in many ways the independent person that I am today because I had the ADA at least in my back pocket so that we could avoid any sort of like inherent discriminations that often come with being a disabled person, especially a disabled student in our education system.
For me, I was born in 90, so ADA began that year. And I never got any diagnoses as a kid. So I didn't have what was needed to access accommodations that I would have made my school experience a lot better or a lot more manageable. And I sort of had this, you know, because of the really ableist world that we live in, this understanding that I just had to kind of suffer through, and that there was no way for me to get any kind of support until after being in school, and realizing that, oh, I could have tried to access some accommodations that would have made it possible to like manage school a little bit better. And then I also just didn't want to seek those kind of accommodations like extensions or having an aide in class. I didn't want to seek those kinds of accommodations in college because, you know, the need to sort of prove so much and divulge so much personal information to an institution was scary, and I had witnessed friends do that, and just how dehumanizing it was for them to have to tell so much about themselves to an institution that then decides, okay, I guess you've proved that you truly have a disability, and we can then provide you with the bare minimum accommodations that we legally have to provide you with. And so even knowing that this existed, it didn't actually feel accessible to me to access. And you know, the implementation of accessing services sometimes is actually another thing to think about, as opposed to just having this like legal thing exist. Like how do institutions actually implement supporting students is another thing to really think about.
Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for sharing your perspective. Before we jump to the next question, I just want to echo back everything you said. I'm a millennial through and through. I don't know a life without the ADA. I can only imagine like pre-ADA, like your fight and struggle that needs to go on even to just get basic life, and it blows my mind because some of the like most like intelligent, like creative people have these intersectionalities, right? And it's wild to me to think that I would not be like in a classroom or a workspace, like without the ADA really being with me, like protecting me. And the idea of just knowing that you have that protection, right? Because I remember getting my first hearing aids in college. I actually failed my hearing test in 5th grade. And I knew failing a test, whatever test it was going to be bad. I did not even take that paper home to my mom because, like you said, Jaden, you know what's on paper, but in practice, it might be a whole other thing depending on the individuals that you encounter and the individuals that you meet. So I was great in college knowing and having caring individuals looking out for me, but I didn't know in 5th grade if I told someone, oh, I'm having difficulty hearing, if that would even set me up to be in a different track in school. Like people will point you out and set you on different tracks. It can change your trajectory of your life depending on who you tell what. So that really brings us into our next question about the obvious ways that the ADA has been infinitely helpful, but like all systems, they're subject to intersectional fails. And sometimes because of our multiple unrepresented identities, some needs aren't met or even considered. And sometimes we fall through the cracks. So I'd like to hear from all of you. What are some ways that the ADA are not going as far as it could for you? What's missing and what's overlooked? Keah?
Woo. There's a lot, unfortunately. Like, I think what I find most frustrating is that when something isn't up to code, specifically with buildings, like when elevators don't work or the railings on the stairs are broken, it's up to the disabled people to see that through, and we have to make a complaint, and then we have to hope that something happens, and then we have to give the owners of the buildings or those things a grace period to get it fixed. And so none of it is guaranteed. I think as great as the ADA is, and as good as it has been to me, there are flaws in the fact that not all of it is actually guaranteed. It's like promised and sure, we'll get to it. Or I did a thing last year, in the before times, where I went into a building and the thing I had to do was on the 5th floor, and the elevator was broken, and the elevator had been broken for years. And like, they were like, oh, we just don't have enough money to fix it. And I think that when you run into things like that, and you run into these moments where people who own these buildings don't care enough about the people who need these things, then you also run into the annoyance of the fact that we, the disabled people, have to bring it up, then give a grace period, and then hope for the best. Like, hope that someday somebody will fix the thing you need to access their building. And that to me is the most frustrating thing about the ADA, is that it's here and it's legal, but it's not always enforced.
Thank you for sharing, Jaden.
I would just have to echo that the ways, especially buildings, aren't accessible at all, with elevators, stairs, chairs not being accessible for people, doorways not being accessible for people. Also, the ways that mental health shows up for folks, and if there are people not being able to access the kind of accommodations that they need in like work, or how that could be a reason that folks lose employment because of how their mental health might show up. And the unique needs, like you were mentioning intersectionality, like there's unique needs that some of us have, that there's this belief that it's just this blanket experience or this monolith experience for all disabled people, and that's just not true. Like there's it's not a monolith. There's these different communities under the disabled umbrella or whatever, and folks have unique needs that aren't being considered at all. And I think there needs to be more support for the nuanced experiences that people have, as opposed to this like sort of uniform response, thinking that that's going to be, what works for folks. I think even how there's like the sidewalk grooves, like some of those are off the side of the street. Like the person, if they have to go down that path, they're going to end up in the actual street, with cars not paying attention, or the way is that, the streets aren't fixed. And so how can someone get down the street? There's just these larger systems that don't really think about or care about how people are actually moving through the world and their needs around moving through the world, whatever their disabilities might be. And I think because there's this focus on this sort of monolith response, it's just not good enough.
I think for me, an issue that I have with the ADA is how non-disabled people abuse it. Like when it comes to voter suppression, how they've been using the ADA as a reason to close certain polling places because it may not be accessible. At least that's the claim. So that means that they're minimizing, the amount of locations that people can go to, particularly in certain states like Georgia. We saw that a couple of years ago, and it's still some way, shape, or form, an issue today. When they utilize this law to claim that, oh, we want to do good by addressing the issue, when they're really trying to suppress votes or suppress people's participation, in their, for their right to vote. Or that we've seen during the pandemic, people utilizing the ADA to say that they have a health condition, so they couldn't wear masks, saying that they're protected by law, things of that nature. Just seeing the abuse of the ADA, which shows its weakness, and in some ways like the lack of teeth, when we have moments to where things are inaccessible, the most we can do is file a complaint and hope that that complaint is taken seriously, and that particularly either small business or large business do their job to follow through. So as great as the ADA is legally, there's a lot of loopholes that people can utilize to not follow the law or abuse the law for their own selfish needs, which put us as disabled people who rely on this law to be included in society, to navigate our society with no barriers. It limits our ability to do so. It limits our ability to believe that we need these accommodations, that we need such access. So, and I think that's been one of the things, particularly as I've been reflecting this year for the 30th anniversary, as to how important the law is, but still the gaps within the law to ensure that we are able to participate, whether it's for voting, whether it's just for access needs, fully, and not have the law misused and abused by those who sees its weaknesses.
Thank you for sharing, Vilissa. Like, you bring up a great point, especially about voting, which is right around the corner. Ha! Woosah! Woosah on that one. And I just want to add some more to what you said about just the layers and nuances, right? So voting, you're taking away places, but do you have even access to a car? What neighborhood do you live in? Like, what type of neighborhood do you live in? Is it, like, are you able to walk certain streets when you get there? Will be people there accommodating to your disabilities? And that all those lenses happen because of like your race, where you're living with class issues. So the intersectionality of that is very important to take into consideration. Me, being a Black woman, working class, being disabled is different than my white man peers who might be a little affluent, have a little more money, have a little more access, right? And closing down certain polling places might be like, I could just drive the next town over. But for me, I'm like freaking out now. Like, how much money is that gonna cost? Oh my goodness! Like, there's certain layers that I will have to navigate because of my intersectionality. So a couple of things I want to mention before moving on to the next question about what's missing and overlooked. I will say a couple of things. First, the cost of disability. So yes, the ADA in practice, equal opportunity for all. But I know when I apply for job opportunities or I show up for an interview and I mention the word disability, they're looking at me like, how much is this person going to cost me to be in this space right now, right? And they will never say it to you, but I can see you thinking it. So for me, I'm not going to share that necessarily right then and there because I know people are factoring in cost of disability and having me on their team, which is, you're losing out on talent because of that. And I really wish there was more foundations or more grants where companies can access money to support their employees because, we live in a capitalistic society. It is what it is right now. So everyone's thinking about the money and the bottom line. So I wish more organizations knew where they can go to access money and resources to bring to their employees in order to support them better. I wish more can be done regarding public service announcements. especially public service announcements in communities that look like my communities, or lower income or middle class communities, Black communities, Latino communities, on what the ADA actually means, particularly for them. I don't know about you, but if I go and they say, okay, what's the ADA? And they drop a bunch of paper on my lap, or even going to a website and scrolling through words and words and words, that's not engaging. I'm a millennial. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. I like videos. I like graphics. I love infographics. I need to get more have more engaging ways to get this information, so I'm knowledgeable, I'm equipped, and I'm ready to pull out the facts that I need to, right? So I really wish the ADA had more partners that will give money and capital for supporting us. And I really wish there were more engaging public service announcements so people know what's in the law and how they can protect themselves, especially in communities that might not get that information, like Black, Latino, lower income communities, and things of that nature. So segueing to our next question, disability spaces are often very white. So what is the consequence of that? Where do you find spaces where you feel represented and affirmed? Jaden?
I'm the kind of person where I just don't factor white people in, because they're gonna be able to access, like, there's so many spaces created for white people. So, you know, I think it's all about creating spaces for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, for queer and trans people, for intersex people, because we're often not included in any of the conversations. So the spaces where I feel affirmed are the spaces that I create with my community, where all of our needs are being acknowledged and met, and really thinking about how, you know, access is love, like Mia Mingus says, and like how our access needs aren't actually a burden, but like an act of love to meet for each other, and like really leaning into like community care, like that kind of work, and that's where I feel affirmed and seen, and I can come as my entire self. And in a world that doesn't center capitalist beliefs about like our productivity and how that dictates our worth. And I find that in white spaces, you know, especially now as a lot of folks are really reckoning with white supremacy, and a lot of white folks are really shocked in ways that people of color aren't. Their feelings tend to get really fragile when they're confronted with their own privilege. And like, yes, having a disability being white doesn't, or having disability doesn't negate your whiteness, like you're still white. And so white is this sort of protector that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color just don't have. And so I just don't have the energy anymore for like fragile white feelings, white fragility. So those spaces I know aren't for me, I know aren't for my people. So it's just really important to create spaces that are.
Thank you, Jaden. What I want to also highlight, I appreciate you said a whole word. I had to type really quickly in the chat. Access is love. Oh, I need that on a shirt. It hit my spirit the right way. And I wanted to affirm that. I also wanted to put in there, like, yes, whiteness, because of our world and existence with white supremacy and white privilege and how that's upheld in our society. But I guess what also boggles my mind sometimes is navigating different communities that I would think would understand. Like, we don't have the same struggle, but might have some sympathy for what I'm going through. Like, for example, is navigating like the Black community, me being part of the LGBTQ community. And it's wild when I get almost like oppressed. And I don't really say the word oppressed, but I don't get the same love sometimes from my own community members. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, but you're Black. I feel like you should understand that there's some level of like navigation that we both have to go through. So if I bring up my disabled identity, I kind of expected you to to support me in that. And sometimes I don't get that love. Sometimes I go to the LGBTQ community and I have to remind people, like I have a disability. And, you know, at first they're like, okay, but sometimes they look at me and like, you know, they get a little tired of repeating themselves. Or like, oh, Crystal, it wasn't anything. We didn't say anything important. You don't have to like really listen in right now. I'm like, whoa, my friend. I thought we were together in this. You should understand, because I feel like you have a marginalized identity, that you could be sympathetic to the other pieces of me that have marginalized identities as well. So yes, disability is often very white, but I also want to add to that, just because you're a part of a marginalized group does not exempt you from almost like recycling those oppressive structures yourself. Just because I'm Black doesn't mean I'm inherently anti-racist because I'm Black. You still got to do the work. You still got to show up. So for me, creating my space on social media, like Black and Disabled, has been a safe space for me. I like going to spaces where I'm focused on my healing. So nature walks, spaces where I can do like online sound baths and things of that nature really help me get grounded, and make me feel affirmed and represented in the space. Vilissa, do you want to contribute your thoughts on the question?
Yes. I think that for me, what I've noticed in our spaces is not just the over-whiteness and the racism, but also the anti-Blackness amongst non-Black people of color. Because I think those are the ones who get unchecked too. Just because we are of color doesn't mean that you respect Black people. I know I've noticed that, you know, if a Black non-disabled person says something or does something that's, you know, offensive or just very careless related to disability, how non-Black people of color, as well as disabled white folks, jump on that person real hard, but don't really do the same thing with their people. And it's like, before you come from my people, check your people too. Check your people first, but they're doing the same thing. You know, let me worry about my house and you worry about yours. You know, that's how I feel about at this point. So I think there's a lot of anti-Blackness, also a lot of misogyny when it comes to Black disabled women and femmes as well, by both white disabled folks and non-Black people of color. So that's what I've been noticing within the space. And of course, you know, I created the hashtag disability2white 4 years ago, and it's still relevant then as it is today. You know, so I think that with the hashtag, we have something that we can conceptualize it easily now and be able to call it out. And I think that's a great thing, but it's still alive and well, you know, when we have organizations that still fail to address race in general, much less the racism within their organizations, much less the over-whiteness of leadership, and not just having Black folks, you know, as administrative staff and not in any significant role. Yeah, it's just all of these issues that are relevant when I started coming to this community 4 years ago are still prevalent, making some progress, but not as much as it should be. I think that's something that we do as Black disabled folks is uplift our own heroes in the movement space who are forgotten in both disability history and Black history. I think that's very important, and also in queer history as well, and uplifting their voices because they matter to us, they're ours, and being very protective of their legacy and not allowing them to be a footnote is very important to me and my work, and I know that other folks as well that's on this panel. And that's kind of what I've been seeing, you know, that are the continuous gaps, you know, that really allows the disabled community not to progress as it should be. One of the things that I said when being interviewed about the ADA turning 30 is, I hope that over the next 30 years, this community is less white and more of color so that we can get our perspectives out there so we don't feel alone and don't feel forgotten. I think that for me, the spaces that I feel most comfortable in are really the spaces with Black women and femmes, because they are the ones that I found, regardless of what pockets of identities, that get it easily. And many of them are disabled themselves. So they begin to engage with activists like myself who talk about disability who live proudly and boldly disabled, that really gets them to start to think about their own disabilities and really to start to chip away at the internalized ableism that they have about themselves and about disability in general. So those are the spaces where I feel safe and seen, you know, is among Black women.
I mean, I'll just echo both Jaden and Vilissa in saying that when I first began to actually put myself in the disability community, because the thing with my CP is that, like, obviously it's been visible my whole life, but I didn't always feel comfortable talking about it. So when I got to a place where I felt comfortable talking about it, it was because of people like Vilissa and Alice Wong and Rebecca Coakley. It was because I felt like I loved them first before I ever loved myself. And I think I really just stopped trying to get the community as a whole to see my worth and just focused on the people that I knew understood. Because like both of you said, the disability community is so white and there's so much racism and sexism and homophobia and misogyny that they don't want to deal with. And I've gotten to a point, you know, specifically this year, where I said to myself, I'm not here to please a whole community of people. I'm here for the people that get it. Either you get on the ride or you're left in the dust. I don't care anymore about trying to make people feel like I'm digestible to them, because I'm all things at once. I'm not going to take all these things off just to talk about disability when I'm walking in the world as a disabled Black woman. Like, it's just not, I don't know, I find myself frustrated sometimes because I think when I look at other disability panels, they'll talk about inclusivity and the entire panel will be white. And it's like, do you not see the irony in that? Because it's just this idea that disability only happens to white people. And so when I craft my spaces now, I make sure that it's people that I feel comfortable with and people that understand what it means to be Black or what it means to be queer or what it means to be anything other than just the standard white disabled guy who hates himself.
Thank you for sharing. I'm no longer going to make myself digestible for others, you know. Just living in your truth and your authentic self and finding the communities that do get you and do accept you. I totally get it. I just wanted to echo and amplify that. I feel like a lot of our first walking this earth is always like, oh, maybe I can find my community here. Maybe I need to hide certain aspects of myself in order to fit in. And I'll tell you, 2020 was awakening for me, and a lot of people were like, no, that's no longer going to work. Cut it out. Like, you're here for you. You're here to live the fullest life you can and be around people who are going to support that, you know, period. So moving on to our next question.
Can I just add one quick thing to that last?
Sorry?
Can I just add one quick thing to that last question?
Yes, go. I love it.
I think because the disability spaces are so white, and right now there isn't a conversation about how a lot of the Black people being killed by the police are also disabled. And that's a conversation that just isn't happening. Like the last person that was just killed, I think yesterday or the day before, he was also disabled. And so that needs to be a part of the conversation. Like, unless we're talking about, like, if we're going to be talking about, you know, Black Lives Mattering and all that stuff, and I know that we're going to get to that later, but disability spaces, like the larger spaces, like aren't having that conversation, like aren't showing up and being, you know, bold and saying Black Lives Matter because they're so, you know, because the dominant spaces that are so white, you know, and I just wanted to uplift how that is a huge consequence of these spaces being so centered around a white disabled person, like you said, a white disabled man who hates himself, as opposed to literally anybody else.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It's so true. And, you know, we're disproportionately killed and slain out here, most definitely. So thank you for bringing that to this conversation as well. And to shift gears a little bit and talk about the supportive tools that we need to thrive and how it's tied to our healthcare system. So I would like to talk about how your experience with the healthcare system is influenced by your gender, race, disability, or any other part of your identity. And I think I'll kick us off with this. Two things. As a Black woman, there was this quote or post on Facebook and Instagram and social media about what it says, what Black men do to the police, the healthcare system does to Black women. And I felt that one. Like, just reading articles like Serena Williams and having to like really advocate for herself, she could have died. Like, it's just so wild to me because like no amount of money can save you. I'm like, I mean, you're really trying to hustle, trying to make money. Like, I could be Serena Williams status and I can say something is wrong. Like, please believe me. And they're like, are you sure? You know, are you making it? You know, let's give it a week or so. And it's like, no, I know my body and I know something is not quite balanced. I need support. I need help. Where I have friends, I have a really good friend who has to get like second and third opinions about her thyroid disorder because people don't believe her and they're giving her the wrong medication. And every time she comes back to that doctor or a new doctor says this medication is making me feel this type of way, they're like, give it a moment, you know, almost like diminishing the pain that we go through, which is a whole nother area of study, Black people and the myth that we have a higher threshold for pain. Yes. So the medical system, and I feel like just adding on to that, it's all related in our intersectionalities, right? So if I was a white woman or passing as white or white absorbed into the white culture, I would be heard, I would be seen, and I would be validated. But the intersectionality of my race and my womanhood, it seemed like you might be making certain things up, or it's not quite as serious as you're making it out to be. And the other thing with the healthcare system, I just wish there was universal healthcare. I'll just say it. I just wish there was universal healthcare because healthcare is tied to like your job a lot of the time. So what happens if you don't have money to have access to healthcare, right? What if you don't have money for a diagnosis? There's so many people out here with disabilities that can't afford a diagnosis. So does that make your experience any less real, any less authentic? So yeah, I feel my womanhood, my Blackness, yes, but I also feel like we need to bring up and talk about money and how money, there's like the tale of two healthcare systems. There's a private healthcare system, and then if you're on Medicaid or Medicare, you get a whole nother different set of doctors, a whole nother different set of care. On that note, I'm going to turn it over to Vilissa again about your comments on this question.
I think for me, when I think about this question, what comes to mind is the fact that sometimes I have to use my status as a social worker to ensure that I'm treated fairly. During the last year of my grandmother's life, we had a home care nurse come in, and I was a part of one of my grandmother's caregivers, me and my aunt. And my aunt was out doing errands, but I was here waiting for the nurse to come. The nurse came. I told her like, oh, you know, my aunt, she'll be back, but you know, I'm here. And she was like, oh, I just wait for your aunt to come back. And I had to tell her, oh, I'm a social worker. And right in that moment, she was like, oh, okay. So I could talk to you about her care then. I'm like, yes. You could have talked to me about her care regardless, but you assumed that me being Black woman in a wheelchair under 4 feet tall, that I cannot possibly be somebody's caregiver, which we do. Disabled people are caregivers as well as being cared for. So that just showed me that sometimes I do have to use that privilege of being a social worker to make sure that I am not discriminated against or mistreated fairly. And that's a harsh reality to have to live with, knowing that if I didn't have that, how would I be treated? And knowing that a lot of us don't have that same privilege, and knowing that many of us are mistreated or not taken seriously when it comes to our pain, especially as Black women. If we go to the doctor for pain, they think that we're lying, or think that Black people have a higher threshold for pain, you know, due to history, you know, the racist history about that when it comes to the medical field and all those things. And you know, it makes me angry that I have to prove my humanity because of a piece of paper that says that I'm a master level social worker. You know, to get the respect of a nurse or a doctor or a specialist. That's not something that we should have to do as Black disabled people or disabled people in general. So that's always, you know, my awakening to how ableism works within the medical field. And I say this as somebody who's been very privileged before I became a social worker to receive good health care from doctors who happen to be white, um, from a kid to now. But I also know that there may be a doctor, physician, whomever that may not, you know, care about my quality of life and just see this one thing and have their own misperception that could greatly influence in a negative way my quality of life and my health status. So that's just something that's always in the back of my mind as I encounter physicians, like how much I may have to prove my humanness to be able to receive the healthcare that I deserve in an already fractured healthcare system.
Yeah, I mean, I find going to the doctor to be exhausting a lot because earlier this year, like before the Rona hit, I had what I know was an upper respiratory infection, and he was convinced that it was heartburn. And what happens is every year, for some reason, I get either an upper respiratory infection or a lower one. Sometimes I get them both at the same time. It's exhausting. Anyway, I knew in my heart of hearts this wasn't just heartburn, but the doctor pretty much strong-armed me into taking the medication for the heartburn. And then he was like, if it's not working in a week, come back. I came back and he was like, I just don't know what it is. I said, it's what I told you. I have an upper respiratory infection. And then he gave me the medication for it, and then it went away. And I said to my mom, I was like, I don't understand why it is that people just don't listen to Black women the first time. I was like, thank God it wasn't any more serious than that, because it happens so often. And it's just like, it's like we recognize the problem, but there's no real solution to it. And so now I'm just very cautious when I go to the doctor, because oftentimes, regardless of the doctor, I'm not really believed. Like I had an incident with a Black doctor earlier this year as well, who didn't believe that I had chronic migraines because he said I was diagnosed too young. So he gave me medication that again didn't work. And then I had to prove to him that this medication he tried didn't work. And so he needed to give me the medication that I was already on and asking for. And I just find it to be so frustrating that not only do we have to navigate the world with people who, you know, disrespect us in many ways because we're disabled, but there's also this element of like, I'm going to go to the doctor for help, but I have to convince them to give me the help that I know I need because they think that they know me better than I know myself. And it's frustrating.
Yeah, just to echo what you both have already said, like having to prove that I understand what's going on with my body with someone who believes that they understand better my body than I do. And then, you know, as a trans person who was assigned female at birth, there's like certain things I need to be able to screen for, but finding a provider that understands that. Like myself and other like trans men have been turned away from gynecologists because they're like, oh no, you don't belong here. Like I had a friend who needed a hysterectomy, not for gender related reasons, just because he had fibroids, which many female assigned Black people develop. And they, you know, they don't know why, but whatever. And he needed a hysterectomy, and the gynecological surgeon was like, oh no, I don't do those. It's like, no, you literally do this. This is literally what you do. And he was like, oh no, I can't help you. As if my friend had some strange body. It's like, no, this is an organ that you know what to do with, like, do your job. And so just finding a provider that will actually see me is difficult. One that if I do go, it's like, so I haven't been to the doctor since 2018 because I just got exhausted of having to explain myself, having providers gaslight me, having providers misgender me. You know, like I don't want to keep being misgendered. you know, or if they don't misgender me, they'll still misgender me, but have on my file in giant all cap letters, transgenderism, you know, so it's like, I'm this confusing body for them. And so for every identity that I have, you know, even I understood this as a young Black girl, that like, even then my experiences weren't really being believed. You know, when I was like menstruating and having a lot of pain and going to my doctor, they're like not believing my pain. They're like, oh, you'll be fine. It's just this, like, you just need to take this Midol. And it's like, no, I know that this is something more serious. And like you were saying, like, they just don't believe Black people, especially Black women, you know, like the first time, you know, and how, you know, but I mean, the medical industrial complex is inherently anti-Black, deeply racist, and always has been against Black people. So, of course, still this system, we're more likely to die, you know. And I think as a person who, you know, I would like to try to get pregnant, but knowing how Black birthing people have high mortality rates, I'm just like, am I going to find a provider that understands my transness, understands what's going on with hormones, understands that I have a uterus and I want to use it, and understands like the disabilities that I have in my body and how I experience the world, so that I can have a healthy birth like some white lady, you know? But that the guarantee of that is just not there. So I'm definitely, like, just the numbers of trans people that delay healthcare, like, just won't go because of all the potential issues we could have, like discrimination getting there, the high rates of just like potential violence someone might experience just getting to the doctor. Then you get there and they dead name you and then misgender you and gaslight why you're even there. And like the amount of trans people that have been told that they don't need certain preventative care because people assume things about their bodies, or assume things about our experiences. It's like, it's exhausting. It's just deeply exhausting. And I need to understand what's going on with my body. So eventually I have to go. And even living in LA, you know, it's hard to find a provider with the insurance I have, actually. Like, I work at a transgender health clinic, and yet the insurance that I have, I can't find a trans competent provider, you know? And so, I can't access healthcare at the clinic I work at that does have trans competent providers. And so here I am, a provider, but I can't find my own provider, you know? And like, the healthcare system is set up in the way that is all about the money and not at all about health.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I'm looking at the time like, oh man, wow, why out of it? We're almost like 7 minutes too. I'm gonna go through quickly the next couple of questions. I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story, specifically about that question. I can feel like the energy and emotion there. So I want to thank you all so much for just sharing that in space right now. Shifting gears, we're in the time of the COVID, right? We're seeing the intersection of art and activism and community building, from versus battles to inclusive DJ dance parties to protest signs and hashtags like disability too white, Black Lives Matter, Black Trans Lives Matter. We can all agree that these creative spaces move our movements forward and create a sense of community for us all. So how do you see the intersection of art and activism as a critical part of justice work?
I'll go. I a lot of the work that I do for, you know, what I feel like is my sort of activism and my resistance is through art, is through writing, is through talking about what it's like for me to live as a Black disabled queer woman. I like to make sure that I'm putting myself first. And I think a lot of times with art, the more specific you are, the more universal it is in a weird way. But also just for me, especially now with the Rona, I find that art is keeping me afloat. Like, art is helping me with my mental health. Just being able to create and, dream for a future where I can tell different kinds of stories, and having something to work toward to see as a final product is really keeping me afloat, just in terms of like getting out of bed and like getting deadlines done and like filling out, my planner. All those things is like, it's so important to me because it's keeping me, able to do the work. But I think art itself is very underrated in a way that I think people don't realize, because there's all these like save the arts programs. But I think specifically for marginalized people who live at multiple intersections, art saves our lives. And so to be able to create it and consume it at the same time is not only changing the world, but changing how we see ourselves within it. And so I think it's very important that we create as much art as possible. And I think it is helping a lot of people to just get through the day. And I'm honestly so honored to be able to create art that helps people in any way.
I'll go next. I think for me, kind of going off what Keah said, just seeing art being more appreciated, during these times. I feel that we have taken art for granted, whether it was writers, painters, musicians, and those are the very people that we've been leaning on, during these times for the healing, for the escape, healthy escapes, for, just really have a community to be able to gather virtually. I think that's something that I've really seen. And as an artist who writes and someone who's really dabbing into drawing and painting, the arts is something that allows me to escape, from the kind of the harshness of the world that we've been subjected to, in general as Black people, but especially during these past 8 months, going on 9, and just really seeing how much art matters to us. And I hope that, whenever there is an after and whatever that looks like for these times, that we do fund art programs. We do support artists. We don't take them for granted. We pay them what they're worth. We respect the art that they do. And I think that is very critical to sustain the art and to elevate the current artists, and also motivate and inspire future artists, and the ones that are seeing the importance of art and really seeing that they too have a place in this world for the craft that makes their heart sing. And so that's kind of how I see it.
To me, I think, the legacy of justice work has been really sustained by artists. I think about especially I think about Black creativity as like this both ancestral thing and like what's paving the way for the future. And I really follow the understanding from Tony Cade Bambara, who said it's the role of the artist to make the revolution irresistible. And I believe that, and so as a writer, as a poet, my work reflects that, reflects how I experience this world, and really pulls people in and is committed to documenting what's really happening. Because so often I think without the artists, we wouldn't really know how stuff really went down, because they're so quick to erase our narratives, like, and even especially in like the disabled justice movement, like I think about like Sins Invalid and like that creative space, and how that space allowed for folks to share their narratives in a way that really highlighted the nuance of experiences, as opposed to this monolith that like disabled people are just people who have to be cared for, like you were saying, Vilissa. Like disabled people are also caregivers. Disabled people are sexual. We're queer. We're trans. We are a whole bunch of things. We're Black. We're other people of color. We're indigenous. We're creatives. We're family members. We're mothers, caretakers. We're a lot of things. We're social workers. Like we're organizers. We do it all. And I think the artists are the ones who make room for that, and make sure to uplift those narratives.
Thank you so much. It's 9 on the East Coast. I think it's 6 in LA, California world. But I do want to get your final thoughts before we finish up with the discussion. So, yeah, Melissa, can we start off with you? If there's one thing that our participants should take away from this discussion, what should it be?
It's the understanding that you matter, that you have value, that the frustrations that you feel are valid, that you're not alone, that you have a community of people that are willing to welcome you, embrace you, that understand you, and how it's so important to, in your own way, find that so that you can have that wholeness, you can have that support system that, is not a luxury, but a right to receive. So I would say for anyone who may feel alone or feel like the only one that has these identities or experiences, know that it's not just you, and that, you're loved no matter where you are, no matter what your body, minds, are, that you are valid and that your life is worthy and that you have worth, no matter what this capitalistic, ableist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, society says about you. You are, just as anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo that and just say that what I can say to people is what I wish I knew when I first started my own journey is that it's okay to find people in the community already and learn from them and get to know them, because like I said, the way that I learned to love myself was through loving other people already in the community. And nobody has all the right answers. Nobody has, everything figured out. It's really just a learning process, and it's trial and error. And what I wish I knew then that I know now is that, like Vilissa said, there are so many people who care about you, so many people rooting for you, so many people eager to hear your stories and see what your lived truth is like. And so I guess I just want people to know that, one, Black disabled people exist, for starters. Two, Black disabled queer people exist, and that we need to be in a community that allows us to see the stories of multiple people, not just the standard white disabled person, because our community right now is very much only about those people, and that really does so much harm. And so if you're going to take anything away from what I've said tonight, please let it be that you open up your own circles and you start to talk to more people in the disability community who don't necessarily look like you. And also, don't make your being an ally an excuse for your own biases and your own ideas about what disabled is and what it can be, and just make sure that you're doing the work of learning every single day and trying every single day to be as inclusive as possible.
I just want to quote I've learned from so many people, but I want to quote two people in particular whose work have really, really guided me. And one is Kay Davidson, who was a Black trans disability justice organizer. He co-created the hashtag Disability Solidarity, and he said, "I challenge the extent to which we place responsibility for advocacy on those designated as leaders or champions. Advocacy is not just a task for the charismatic individuals or high-profile community organizers. Advocacy is for all of us. Advocacy is a way of life. It is a natural response to the injustices and inequality in the world. While you and I may not have the sole responsibility for these inequities, that does not alter its reality." And I think I take that as an encouragement for all of us to find our space in this work, because there is a space for all of us in this work. And then the last one for me, Mingus, again, access is love. Realizing that it's not, I'm not a burden because I have needs, and to the interdependence and to show up for each other is an act of love that we all should have access to. So those two really just like guide me, and I hope that guides folks as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll end with my own final note as well. There is a unique set of intersecting identities that make up who you are and allow you to see and feel perspectives that other people might not be able to see or feel readily. So by sharing your story, your knowledge, standing your truth, advocating for your identities to be respected and heard in systems that are designed to oppress you, you're helping yourself and you're helping others vocalize their power. And when we stand in our power in spaces like this, we normalize and amplify our collective strength and to bring about change as a community. So I just say, remember as you fight these systems, remember to seek out and find your healing spaces and communities that allow you to live in your truth. On that note, thank you for the discussion, Vilissa, Keah, and Jaden. I'll turn it back to you, Amon.
Thank you so much. I just learned so much just listening to y'all talk. You're brilliant. I will say it over and over again. You are always, always welcome at NCLR. We appreciate you. Thank you to Kay Shakespeare, Jaden Fields, Keah Brown, and Vilissa Thompson for sharing your personal experiences as well as your intersectional analysis and your all-around brilliance. It was a pleasure to have you. Remember, we can't get to LGBTQ equality without an intersectional understanding of all parts of our identity. That means that even though Disability Awareness Month is coming to a close, that the inclusion of disability justice stays with us. We need representation in all of our work, in all of our panels, in all of our analyses. Remember, oppression still happens even within communities that experience oppression. If we aren't actively working to dismantle oppression, it works within our communities, even LGBTQ identities and other represented identities. 43 years ago, NCLR was founded because there was a gap in the LGBTQ movement and in the women's rights movement. The work that we do is the same thing then that we did now, and that is close the gap so that all of us can get to equity. Our fight for justice isn't done, and it won't be until we have everyone with us. You can find out more about NCLR's work and our campaign to get to access, system change, and lived equality at nclrights.org/protecting-our-future. Again, my name is Imani Rupert Gordon. It was a pleasure to have these amazing panelists and to all the viewers and listeners. Let's get to liberation together. Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. It was so great. Bye.
Good night, everyone.